Fun Ideas Productions presents the Fun Ideas Podcast.
Hi, this is Mark Arnold, and welcome to Fun Ideas Podcast number 188. The Fun Ideas Podcast is brought to you in part by Freaky Magazine.
Hey kids, have you read Freaky? The magazine of weird humor for freaks like you. Freaky Magazine is a way-out collection of weirdo comics, kooky gags, photo funnies, social satire, and surreal collage. 52 pages of insanity in the tradition of magazines of yore like Cracked, Plop, and Zap. Special offer for Fun Ideas listeners: get a free sample copy in the mail, made of smelly newsprint and smudgy ink the old-fashioned way. Just message your mailing address to theslowpoisoner@gmail.com. That's theslowpoisoner@gmail.com while supplies last.
On sale now is Mark Arnold's latest book called Pac-Man, the first animated show based upon a video game. This book tells the story of Pac-Man phenomenon and goes through the entire history of the Hanna-Barbera Animation Studios, the history of the video games, pre-Pac-Man, the history of Pac-Man, the character, the video game, the spin-offs, the merchandise, and the animated TV series. Each and every episode of the classic 1980 series is covered and examined. Plus, Mark Arnold covers how Pac-Man has been honored on various anniversaries, including the 40th anniversary in 2021. A fun read for casual and hardcore Pac-Man and video game fans alike, featuring mini character model sheets and other images. Available online through Bear Manor Media, Amazon, and Barnes & Noble. Get your copy today.
Friends, have you tried Lee's Comics? Lee's Comics is better than the leading comic book store. Wait a minute. Lee's Comics is the leading comic book store, based on arbitrary standards set by Lee Hester himself.
Lee's Comics was named as one of the 21 best online dealers by popoptique.com. To shop the Lee's Comics eBay store, go to eBay and search for Lee's Comics Inc. That's LEESCOMICSINC, period. Don't forget the period. Mention the Fun Ideas Podcast when you order, and you'll receive a free bonus gift. As the pandemic is now lifting somewhat, I am making more personal appearances at shows in Oregon and California. Check my Facebook page as to where I might be next, usually working with Lee's Comics. I'm getting closer to finishing my Mad and my Turtles books. Another Monkeys book is on the horizon, as well as a book about TV animation studios. And look for more articles from me in Back Issue, Alter Ego, and Hogan's Alley, and various guest appearances on other podcasts, including those by Ed Rising, Hudson Ranny, Dennis Ball, Phil Hall, and others. My Pac-Man book is my latest release. Look for my Disney book and my Warren Kremer book coming soon. On today's show, we have a writer who is here to discuss his books, The Colors of Callas and Double Entendre, The Parallel Lives of Mae West and Ray Bourbon. Here he is, Patrick C. Byrne. Hi, this is Mark Arnold at Fun Ideas Podcast, and today we have a special person that has written two books on very different subject matters. One is on the opera singer Maria Callas, and the other one is about the double entendre lives, parallel lives of Mae West and Ray Bourbon. I hope that's how you pronounce his name, or Bourbon.
You can make it grand if you want to.
Okay. But we'll be talking about both books, and here he is, the author, Patrick C. Byrne. How are you today?
I'm great. Glorious weather here. Hope it's the same where you are.
Yeah. I'm up here in Springfield, Oregon. I think I saw that you're in Kansas.
That's right, but I'd much rather be in Oregon.
Yeah, it's a nice sunny day today. It's probably about 70 degrees, I guess, so it's not too bad. So,
Great place.
so you've written 2 books that I know about. One was The Colors of Callas, Reflections of an Icon, and it looks like it came out in 2002. Is that correct?
That's right, sir. It did come out in 2002.
And I guess what I usually ask a lot of my guests is just tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got interested into writing a book.
Oh, writing has always fascinated me. I graduated from Rockhurst College, and I sort of majored in writing and literature. I didn't really get up the nerve to write a book until many years later. And, of course, I had always been advised, write what you know about. I'm not big on fiction. So I did. I've always been a big opera aficionado and a big Maria Callas fan. So that's what prompted the book on Maria Callas. And I have actually seen her in person several times and met her. It took me about 5 years of research to put it all together. And I worked with, very interestingly, a gentleman named Taylor Perot. He is my co-author. And he was originally Lana Turner's manager. And I met him at a play in New York about Maria Callas. The play is called Masterclass. It's written by McNally, and it's the story of Maria Callas teaching opera at Juilliard Academy. And I met him in the lobby, and we got to talking, and he said, I'm Lana Turner's manager. Of course, she had passed away by then. And he said, I've written a book about her, and I'd like to write something about a celebrity. And he said, you seem to know a lot about Maria Callas. And he said, would you co-write a book with me? And I said, well, yes, but you're going to have to contribute something other than your name, which he did. It turned out Lana Turner was a good friend of Ava Gardner, and Ava Gardner, of all things, was a good friend of Maria Callas. So he had some really juicy anecdotes about the two.
Okay, because I was wondering how the connection was there. I did notice that he was with Lana Turner, and I was like, how does this connect?
Well, he's very much of a bon vivant and a big gossip monger. So he picked up everything when he was in Hollywood. So, but Ava Gardner became friends with Maria Callas when Maria Callas was on her farewell tour of the United States in 1974, and that's how the connection came together. And it helped me get published by having a published author as a co-author.
Did you know the process of anything on how to write a book, or did he tell you all the ropes, basically?
No, I knew more about it than he did, frankly.
That's funny.
Yeah, I had really dabbled in writing for a long time, but had never submitted anything. And after I spent, as I said, almost 5 years collecting and researching and putting together and interviewing people who knew Maria Callas. And in fact, he's passed away, but a very famous gentleman who lived in Kansas City, was quite prominent socialite, very wealthy, and he is responsible for having brought Maria Callas to Kansas City in 1959, at which time I saw her at the local concert she did, and I was only 16 years old. And luckily, he lived long enough for me to interview him. And he had traveled with her, so he had some really nice personal anecdotes about her. She's very colorful, as most divas are.
Yes.
But she seemed to be the absolute diva.
I guess the question is, now I've heard of Maria Callas, and I'm not a huge opera fan, but at least I've heard of her. And, I'm aware of, and I've seen a few operas in my lifetime and stuff like that, but what attracted you to her and her specifically?
Incredibly passionate, dramatic singer.
I see.
Wasn't like, and plus she was slender and beautiful, very glamorous. And at a time when so many of the opera divas looked like boxcars, and they just stand there and sing and wave one arm up and down. She became very much involved in the drama in the opera. She was much like, let's say, Anna Magnani, an Italian movie star, very fiery, which makes it much more interesting.
Now, I understand she, in reading a little brief background about Maria's life, she started out rather heavy and kind of dowdy. So
like a pachyderm, they described her.
So, I guess, do you have information of, why she was that way in the first place? And then what prompted her to decide to become slender and more elegant over the years?
She had kind of unhappy childhood. She had a stage mother like Gypsy in the musical, very pushy. They were from Greece. And Maria sort of indulged her eating habits because the mother was not motherly or kind like you would expect a parent to be. They lived in Greece, and she pushed her into the conservatoire there in Athens for opera singers and lied about her age, said she was 17. She was actually 13, but she was a big girl. And once she opened her mouth, they all realized she had a fabulous voice, and she became the star of the conservatory. She came to the United States very young, probably 20, and I was auditioned at the Metropolitan Opera, but she was so heavy, they offered her the role of Cho-Cho-San in the opera Madame Butterfly, and of course that character has got to be a petite Japanese, geisha girl.
Yeah.
Well, Maria was smart enough. She said, "I'm not going on stage, weighing 300 pounds and try to be a geisha girl." So she actually turned down the Metropolitan Opera, but she was lucky enough to get a contract through an agent in New York to sing at the arena in Verona. And that launched her career. She created a sensation. And, they were accepting at the time of a plump prima donna. But she married a millionaire while she was there, and he was much older than her. And he got her contracts all over Italy. And she decided if she was going to be viable as a stage persona, she took off, 160 pounds. And she's 5'8" and became like a fashion model. Absolutely gorgeous.
Was there any secret to how she did it? Because, there's also different diets and things like that, or did she just stop eating or something?
Well, like, as we say now, there's so much false information, even in my extensive research. There was a rumor she had ingested a tapeworm.
I read that, and I was going to ask you about that, too.
That's not true.
Okay.
But it makes good copy. No, she did it by dieting. She ate mostly small amounts of raw meat, which I would be afraid to do, and salads, and drank lots of water, and exercised, and took the weight off.
Now, backing up a little bit, did she have any real formal training, or how did she know she could sing?
Yes.
Okay.
She trained when they took her to the conservatory in Athens, and it was during the war, of all things. There were very famous voice teachers there from La Scala, which is the big Italian opera house, and she was lucky enough to get the mentorship of the old-time great singers. So her training was absolutely fabulous. You don't get that kind of training today.
Right. And then as time went on, what I kind of gathered is, like after she lost the weight and she became basically a star, she kind of got a little bit lazy, if for lack of a better term, in her singing. Is that true?
That didn't happen until later.
Okay.
She really was a big star from about 1951 until 59. And you've probably heard this story. In 1959, she met Aristotle Onassis,
Yes.
who was married to Jacqueline Kennedy, who was the ultimate gold digger. And she got into what they call jet set society, and he put her on the yacht, and he drug her all over the world, and she stopped practicing, and singers can't stop practicing any more than dancers can stop practicing. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, she did get lazy, but then, of course, he dumped her for Jackie O, and then it had been years since she had really sung, and she made a comeback, but it was extremely difficult. I saw her in 1965 when she made the comeback at the Metropolitan Opera in the role of Tosca. Uh-huh. And she was absolutely fabulous because she was a great actress, but she did have to struggle with the music. You know, the voice is a muscle, and if you don't keep it in shape. And then she toured the world in 1973 and 74 in what they called the farewell concerts. She did 44 concerts worldwide. Mm-hmm. And I saw several of those, and I even, I guess I can say this, recorded them.
Oh, no, that's fine.
And even released them on CD. I had a little record company called Ombra, which means shadow. And didn't get in trouble over it, at least not yet. So.
Yeah. I think now, you know, it's like, I don't know, wouldn't it be kind of public domain or something like that anyway?
It
actually
is.
Yeah.
Now, you don't want to record an operatic performance in an opera house.
Right.
Because they'll come after you. But if you record a singer in concert, they don't seem to mind. In fact, they're usually flattered that, you know, people care.
So what was the difference on her singing? I mean, it's like, you know, you're saying she was kind of pushing. So if you can explain how it sounded, like you said you saw her in 59, which was like during her prime, versus, say, 74, which was...
Right. Well, the upper register, she was a coloratura soprano. She could sing very high, intricate music, hit an E flat. She sang operas like Lucia di Lammermoor and I Puritani. You have to be, but she had a very big, hefty voice, but she could still go up with it, which is very unusual. But at the final concerts, they transposed the music down. I'm a friend of the gentleman who was her accompanist, Robert Sutherland. I've met him many times in the UK, and he's written a book about the concerts. It's really very interesting. It's called Diaries of a Friendship. He was a marvelous musician, and she was too, and if she knew she wasn't going to hit a note, he'd transpose the whole thing down an octave, so she didn't have to scream.
Well, it sounds like a lot of
work.
Aging rock stars who have their songs lowered to lower keys and things like that so they can continue to sing. But it seems like, was it just basically practice, or did some of it have to do with age? Granted, she wasn't very old, but still, she was older than she was.
Older and had not sung. You know, it would go 9, 10, 12 months without a performance. You simply can't, and she wouldn't practice.
Oh.
You cannot do that. You just cannot.
Right.
Female voices tend to age out starting in the 40s, and it's rare for a prima donna to sing after 50, 55. Although I knew one prima donna named Magda Olivero who sang till she was 90.
Oh, wow.
I mean, but she practiced all the time.
Yeah.
You know, she was like an athlete.
So, let's see. You said you met her a few times. Did you actually talk to her and have, like, conversation, or was it just, like, polite handshake and, like, hey, you know?
You go backstage, and there's a line of people. You don't get that. You know, but I knew what to say, and I even took an LP. You know, remember LP records?
Oh, yeah.
An album, and had her sign it, which I have framed in my music room. She's very gracious to her public, and she was savvy enough to know that, you know, they're the ones that buy the records. By the way, she's the largest selling female opera star in history. She's up there with Pavarotti. Her records still sell.
Mm-hmm. Is there anybody in current opera that would even compare at this point?
Yes. There's a diva at the Metropolitan Opera called Sandra Radvanovsky. Very similar to Maria Callas.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful voice and very well trained. And I believe she's approaching 50, and she's still knocking them dead. Sells out. I've only seen her once, but she's quite good. Unlike that Anna Netrebko person from Russia, who's quite vulgar.
Now, you are a reviewer, and you have a regular column. What's the name of the column?
Well, it's the Belgian Opera Guide.
Uh-huh.
It's online. Well, I haven't done anything for a couple of years.
Okay.
Unfortunately, with the pandemic, I didn't go see any operas.
Mm-hmm.
No travel. You know, I sit at home and watch the Met on PBS.
But in the time you were writing it, I mean, did you write about all sorts of performers and all sorts of operas? What were your columns typically about?
Well, I interviewed, I think, 7 or 8 famous singers they love being interviewed. You know, that keeps their name alive. Some of them were retired. And also I would review any opera that I happened to see, you know, in person, you know, in Chicago, or like in the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden in London. Anything I saw, I always took notes. And as I say, sometimes even recorded it, not just to, you know, refresh my memory.
Mm-hmm. And also you have been a record producer. How did that come about? Just because you have your recordings, or was it something you were aspiring to do?
Well, it's interesting. When I went to see Maria Callas in 1974, I followed her around the country, by the way, from Boston to Chicago to Dallas to New York. Anyway, I would record I had a little Sony recorder, you know how they used to make them, and I would record the concert just for my own use. And I had a friend that was a sound engineer here in Kansas City. He works at the conservatory, and he's a musician, and he said, "Oh, how were the concerts?" And I said, "Oh, here, I'll play you the tape." And he said, "I know a CD manufacturer here in town. Why don't you put that on, manufacture it?" And he said their sound engineers can plump it up, you know, and clean it up, get rid of the extraneous noise. And he said, "I have a friend that will design the CD cover for you." Well, you know, I didn't really know what I was doing, and I just jumped right in and did it. And then I joined the Maria Callas International Club in London, and they had a magazine published 3 times a year. And so they were going to have a gala to honor Maria Callas at the Royal Opera House. And the gentleman who was the director of the magazine said, "Are you going to come over?" And I said, "Well, yes, I wouldn't miss it." And I said, "And by the way, I've got a recording of her live singing at the Boston Symphony Hall." And he said, "Oh my God, bring it." So I brought over an empty suitcase full and released them at the gala. You know, I had a table set up, and well, good Lord, I sold every one of them in 5 minutes. And then I found a distributor in New York who carried them at Tower Records. Well, the next thing I knew, I was a manufacturer, and I'm actually a hairdresser. I mean, you couldn't get further away from what I got into.
That's funny. But it says that ultimately you did like 6 releases of Maria Callas recordings. Is that correct?
I did. Now, some of them I bought the live tapes from, you know, there's an underground of that. I will tell on myself. I had a friend that ran a record store in New York City, and he sold these live performances under the counter, you know, if they were from an opera house. Well, he had a recording of Maria Callas doing Tosca in 1965, and he said, "I'll sell it to you." Well, I bought it for, I won't tell you what I paid for it, way too much. And I thought, well, I've spent that much, I may as well release it. Well, I found another manufacturer that did it, and a designer who did a beautiful package. It was a double CD, with all sorts of information and photos and things. And luckily, we had sold out the first run when I got a cease and desist letter from the Metropolitan Opera.
Fun.
Dear Mr. Byrne, cease and desist, and if you have any material left, please send us. Well, I couldn't because we'd sold every single copy of the damn thing. So, and of course, I didn't manufacture it anymore. I didn't want to go to court.
So I'm sure that it was highly collectible at this point if you're trying to...
It's amazing. Well, it's like my Callas book, The Colors of Callas. It was in fact, a little tidbit, when I first released it, or when it was published on Amazon, it went to the bestseller list for a couple of weeks. And it was continued to be in print, I think, until 2011 or 12. Then it went out of print because the publisher went bankrupt. But it's now on Amazon. You can buy it, but good grief, they're asking $150, $160 for it. And of course, I don't get a damn penny out of it.
Any chance of a reissue of it or a revised version?
I've thought about it, and I approached my publisher from the second book, Byrne Media, and even though it's a celebrity book, they just thought it was too, I don't know, intellectual. It's really not. It's full of gossip. I tried to make it kind of juicy and lighthearted, know. Otherwise, just talking about opera can be boring.
Well, I'm friends with Ben Omart, and many of my books are published by Bear Manor, so I might nudge him and say, give the book a chance, come on.
I think so too, and I would re-script it.
Yeah.
I've got a lot more stuff to add to it.
Okay.
And I take out some of the sort of grandiose stuff that my co-author thought should have been in there. He was a little bit of the pinky finger up when you drink tea type.
Did he add more of like the scandalous stuff, like you mentioned the affairs with Aristotle Onassis, or you had that? Okay.
I did all that. He would write long descriptions of how she would stand by her window in her beautiful Paris apartment and gaze at the moon, But there isn't much of that.
So during the latter part of her life, which she died at a relatively young age of 53, is that correct? Something like that?
That's right. She had a heart attack, but she was taking prescriptions, shall we say.
Okay.
That weren't illegal. Stimulants, for her to do those concerts, they would give her injections. You know, they used to call them B12
Yeah, I was going to say, isn't it the vitamin B12 shot? Yeah.
With the laced with the amphetamine like JFK did.
Right.
And that gets to your heart as you get older. And poor lady, had a heart attack and died.
Now, at the time of her death, you said she did her farewell concerts in 74. She passed away in 77. So was she truly thinking farewell in 74, or did she think someday I may be back? Yeah.
She was practicing. She was using the concerts for practice. She was going to make a comeback, but she couldn't quite. She was afraid to come back, because it's different singing concert with just a pianist who can transpose at the last second to singing with a full orchestra and a fully staged opera and a tenor who's going to try to out-sing you. So, but there were stories of her making comebacks, and she was thinking about doing Carmen, which she was fabulous because basically she had become a mezzo-soprano. She lost the high notes. And she would have been good as Carmen because she was fiery, but it didn't happen. Zeffirelli made a movie about her. It was really not very good. I think he missed the opportunity
Yeah.
Well, it was miscast. Fanny Ardern didn't look anything like Maria Callas. They could have chosen, I think they should have gotten a Greek actress or an Italian. You know.
The recently passed away Irene Papas might have been a good choice.
Oh, perfect. I adore her.
But in any case, I don't think I've seen that film. I've seen a lot of Zeffirelli films, but just not that one, I don't think. But
I wouldn't bother.
Oh, okay, I was going to say, is there a good documentary on Maria, or no?
Oh, lots of them.
Okay.
Lots of them. They're all available at Amazon. Just click in Callas and you'll get a mix of CDs, and there'll even be VHS documentaries still floating around.
Okay.
And of course, there's a limited amount of video available to look at, and they kind of rehash it. Some of them go for the scandalous part, and I like the ones that tell the story of the life and the hardships, and plus the personal life, which was really kind of screwed up.
Yeah. Well, as far as performances that are available, I mean, she only appeared on, say, like Ed Sullivan Show, correct? Is that it, or is she on a few others?
No, she sang at a gala in front of the President of France in 1958 in the Legion of Honor, and she did an enormous concert of arias, and then she did the whole second act of Tosca in costume, and anybody that would be interested in Callas should buy that, because they've restored it was from a television program.
Okay.
They've restored the sound and the visual, and it's really magnificent.
Okay.
And she was in full voice then, so.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I'd have to check out if I was going to investigate further, because
I think you'd enjoy it.
Yeah. And
it's very grand. All the Brigitte Bardot was there, and all the the movie stars in their furs and tiaras, and
And it was recorded originally for television, you said, or was it?
No, it was just recorded and released on originally on VHS, and then of course EMI, who's her record label, got a hold of it and said that it was their property, but it really isn't. They didn't have a contract with her for anything video; it was just sound. They released it, and then several people who are manufacturers have gotten it and improved it, and it's really lovely to look at.
Mm-hmm. Now, in her lifetime, did she have any aspirations to do anything else? Like, say, if this comeback didn't work out, did she have any aspirations to doing acting or any other work?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
She made a movie for Pasolini, who was a very famous Italian director. And they didn't make an opera, but she chose the story of Medea based on the fact that she was famous singing the opera Medea. Medea is quite a character, quite a Greek myth character, who killed her children and did all sorts of things.
Right.
But it's a fascinating film, and they did it. Pasolini's very graphic, and they did tremendous research, and they put it in the original locations that Jason and the Golden Fleece. They did it in those locations, and her costumes are barbaric, and she does a bang up job. I mean, it's just as a movie, it's very entertaining.
So you think that might have been a career path for her had she lived?
Yes, I think she could have easily been a stage actress, because she had that voice, Singers have wonderful speaking voices.
Right.
And she was good looking, so.
I've noticed that on certain people. It's like, I don't know if they sing, but they have that certain voice, and I go, I bet they sing. Even if it isn't professional, it's like they have that type of voice that they probably good singer.
I've got several friends that, a couple of retired opera singers, and the minute they open their mouth, all they'd have to do is hum a little and they could sing, so.
Okay, well, we'll probably come back to Maria near the end here, but let's shift gears to your other book, okay? So this one was recently released in 2019, and I'll give the title A Double Entendre, The Parallel Lives of Mae West and Ray Bourbon or Bourbon, or how you pronounce it?
Bourbon, just
Bourbon.
like the
Oh,
drink.
okay, I
But
wasn't
I'll tell
sure.
you,
I thought he might have had an affected way and say Bourbon or something. I don't know.
well, he could. He could get very grand, and that's not really his name. And he claimed that his mother, who had a child out of wedlock, he was the bastard child, he'd lived in France in a convent, and she was going to be a nun, and she got knocked up, and of course they shipped her off to Texas to some couple that wanted to adopt the baby. And he said that the father of the child was a descendant of the French Bourbon royal family, which of course is a whole lot of horse hockey.
Now, this guy is like an interesting character, to put it mildly, and it's like, I'm like reading his little bio, and I'm going, okay. First of all, you don't know what's exactly true, considering, he tended to exaggerate and stuff. So how did you navigate through all this to kind of reasonably figure out what was the truth and what wasn't?
I knew him personally.
Okay.
When I was in Hairdressing Academy many years ago, he was appearing in Kansas City at a really world-famous female impersonator venue called the Jewel Box. And he was the star, and he was in his, not dotage, but he was late 60s, getting close to 70, and I would go every single night to watch him. He was the funniest man I think I have ever seen. He was a lot like Milton Berle in drag. Very humorous, man. And he'd been all over the world. He'd done the command performance for the abdicated King Edward and Mrs. Simpson. He worked in Cuba with the mafia. He worked with Josephine Baker in Paris at the Follies. He had a fabulous life. But I got to see him, when he was older. And I approached him one night because after the shows were over, they'd come out and sit at the bar and drink. And I got up enough nerve one night to go over, and I said, "You always talk about Mae West." And I said, "I love Mae West." And I said, "Did you really work with her?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, well, we got to be friends." And, oh, my goodness, he worked with Mae West on Broadway in a big hit show. They toured the country. It was called Catherine Was Great. Mae wrote it, and of course she starred in it, and it was Catherine of Russia, and of course Mae thought she was great, and Ray Byrne played her hairdresser, Florian, which was typecasting. I mean, it was wonderful.
Now, how
he
did
made movies?
How did Mae West discover him? I mean, what was he doing before that?
Mae West started in vaudeville as a child.
Yeah.
And, vaudeville began to fade away, and she wasn't really breaking in and being a big star. She was incredibly ambitious. Everything was about Mae West. And her mother had some money, and she said, "Why don't you write a play and star in the play and present yourself as, it's a little more legitimate than vaudeville and baggy pants comedians." So Mae wrote a play called S.E.X.
Yes.
Well, that caused a riot, but it sold out for a year. And she decided to write another play. And she said, I'm going to write, she liked female impersonators. She used to copy the way they acted and dressed. And so she wrote a play called The Drag. Well, she went down to Greenwich Village to one of the gay clubs where they had a lot of drag queens, and she put out the word she was doing an audition for a play. But they had to be impersonators. Well, she went down there the night of the auditions. There were about 60 of them, and Ray Bourbon was one of the ones she picked out to be in the drag. And they became friends after that. She, of course, went on to Hollywood when vaudeville died out. And Ray even ended up going to Hollywood. But before that, he worked in Long Island at Vitagraph Studios, which were silent movies. He met Rudolph Valentino there.
Wow.
He had a phenomenal life. And then he went to Hollywood. And there are several movies you can still buy that he has small parts in. I'm sure you've heard of Rudolph Valentino's Blood and Sand film about the bullfighter. Well, the opening scene is Ray Bourbon plays a bullfighter who gets gored and dies in the arms of Rudolph Valentino.
Wow.
It's really amazing.
I'll have to see that again.
And then you remember Gold Diggers from 1935?
Yes.
Well, Ray was in the sequel, Gold Diggers of 1937.
Right. Which I think I've seen too. I think I've seen all those Gold Digger films.
And then he had a very small part in, no, I won't say small, it was a featured part. He made a film called Hip Zip Hooray for RKO, and he plays this mincing, swishy fashion designer, which was perfect typecasting. And it's a black and white sound film, and he's very funny in the part.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can still buy it. I'm not sure. A friend sent me a copy of it from London when he first found it.
Mm-hmm.
But he had a varied career. He could sing. He could be a stand-up comedian. He was also, he got started in the music halls in London because he was sent there by his stepfather. It's a long story, but Ray was born in Hudspeth, Texas, if you can imagine. And his mother's husband died, or his adopted mother's husband died, left a lot of money, and she got remarried, and the man she remarried didn't like Ray because he was very effeminate. And he had a friend in London that ran a boys' school for kids that had problems. So they shipped Ray off to London. Well, he took up with this gay professor who used to take him to the music halls at night. And, you know, music halls do a lot of female impersonation. They call it a dame. That's a word for drag. Well, he decided he wanted to do it. And the next thing you know, he auditioned and he got a job in the chorus.
Yeah.
And he worked for several years in the music halls, and then he came to America and tried to break into vaudeville in, you know, the first part of the last century.
Now, I'm kind of curious because, you know, just the general history of these type of things. Was female impersonation accepted, or did he ever get in any sort of legal trouble or anything else like that over the course of his career? I mean, I know he went to jail, but that's a totally different story, which we'll get to later.
Yeah. No, vaudeville, an integral part of vaudeville was drag. They'd either be, there were glamorous drags who, the ladies in the audience would come to see them to emulate their fashions. And a lot of them were comedic. Ray tended to be, although when he was young, he could be attractive, but he was wonderful at comedic drag. Just excellent. He could talk off the top of his head.
So this was generally accepted by audiences and everything like that?
Oh, a big part of vaudeville. Very big part.
I mean, I know cross-dressing, you know, originates in Shakespeare's time, you know, so, you know, so at least, you know, I don't know how you go back further, you know, but, you know, it's like, it's just kind of funny over time, you know, sometimes it's acceptable, sometimes it's not, you know, it's like, you know, so I was just wondering during the prudish earlier parts of the 20th century if he ever got into any sort of trouble for that.
You didn't walk about the streets or go into a cocktail lounge in drag. They get you. Yeah. But as long as it was a show, it was a very accepted thing. Very much accepted. In fact, the play, The Drag, had something like 50 drag queens in it. And they sang and danced and told dirty stories. And, you know, the audiences lapped it up. But I will say, when he went to Hollywood in the 30s, you know how politicians are. They were going to clean up the gay bars and the lavender mob, as they called it.
Yeah.
And they would raid the gay clubs and tell them that they could appear on stage, but they couldn't wear their drag outfits. Well, they were out of jobs.
Wow. So beyond that, did he do any other types of work, or is it just basically stage film and that type of thing, or did he ever work in radio or anything like that?
He did a little radio. I don't think he did very much of it. Okay. He had an interesting voice. Mm-hmm. He recorded, I wish we were being visual, he recorded 12 LP records, mm-hmm. which is a lot for a comedian, especially a gay comedian. Mm-hmm. I just think I've got some sitting here.
What type of material? Is it spoken word?
Yeah, spoken and sung.
Okay.
And he wrote a lot of the ditties, as he called them, and they were at first sold under the counter because they were a little raunchy. But he didn't use bad language. It was all double entendre. I'm holding up one of the albums right now. It's called Bourbon, 100 Proof. And he looks like an old madam with a cigarette. Mm-hmm. Here's one called, I'll describe the cover. It's a very well-endowed gentleman in a pair of tight cowboy jeans with his legs apart, and Ray is behind him, and his legs are kind of like a frame around Ray, and it says, Ray Bourbon, a girl of the Golden West. And he did one called Ladies of Burlesque, mm-hmm. and he's standing in front of a theater marquee with his name, now appearing Ray Bourbon, world's foremost female impersonator. Mm-hmm. He claimed to have had a sex change because that was kind of sensational in the 50s. And his career was beginning to decline. And his agent said, you need to do something to get interest in publicity. So he said he went to Mexico and had a sex change. Mm-hmm. Of course, he didn't. Okay. But it got him a lot of jobs, and he released an album called Let Me Tell You About My Operation.
Milk it for all it's worth, I guess. Yeah.
And a Variety magazine, which is the Bible of theater, yeah. They actually printed a headline that said Ray, R-A-Y -R-A-E, who was Ray after he was Ray. Bourbon switches his sex allegiance. He's now a she. They said he's a Mexican standoff.
So in later years, you worked with Mae West, but did he keep in touch with Mae West, or did he?
Yes.
They were friends or pals up until. Let's see. Did she pass away first? He passed away first in 1971.
He passed away first in jail from medical neglect. It was really sad, very sad. He was arrested here in Kansas City. They sent the sheriff up to Kansas City and arrested him at the Jewel Box. It was a huge scandal.
Mm. So you had already been conversing with him at that time. I mean, were you aware of anything going on about, and do you think it's true that he was accomplice to a murder, since we're talking about this now?
No, he really wasn't.
Okay.
He was a bit of a hoarder. He would take in stray animals, mm-hmm. And take care of them. He was really a kind-hearted man, and he never really had a significant other. It's interesting. But anyway, he would travel. He had this old station wagon and with a trailer he put on the back. And, drag queens had to kind of rough it, and they had to take a contract wherever they could get one to perform. And he was working at the Jewel Box, but his contract had run out, and he was going down to somewhere in Texas to perform. I think it was on the border. And he always took his dogs with him in the trailer. Mm-hmm. Well, the car broke down in some small town. He had some old broken-down station wagon. And he didn't know what to do with the dogs, and they couldn't fix the car, and he found a local vet who said, well, you can board them here, and you get the money and come back and get them. So he got a bus and went back to Kansas City, started working at the Jewel Box again, and he went back to Texas, and I think he drove down and got another car and called the vet and said, I want to get my dogs. And they said, well, we've disposed of all of them. Well, he was furious, but he didn't know what to do. So he went back home heartbroken to Kansas City. And at the time, he unfortunately had got mixed up with a hustler, a young hustler. who was kind of taking money from him, and I don't know for favors or what. He never told me that. And the hustler had another friend that was a hustler, and they made a little plot up to go down and rescue the dogs, and they thought that way they could blackmail Ray and get some money out of him if they said they had the dogs. Well, unfortunately, this young boy got into Ray's apartment, and Ray had a gun. And took the gun, unbeknownst to Ray, went down there with this guy, confronted the veterinarian to get the dogs, and there was a tussle, and the gun went off and killed the veterinarian.
Ooh.
But they never could figure out which one of the boys killed him. Well, they traced the gun. It was registered to Ray Bourbon. And, of course, the kids spilled the beans, and then they said Ray had paid them to come down and get that. Of course, he didn't. And they put them in jail, too.
Okay.
And then they came and got Ray and put him in jail in Brownwood, Texas, of all places. And it's so funny. I've got a friend who has a restaurant in Brownwood, and he's a Ray Bourbon fan. And he has a big cutout of Ray Bourbon on the door of the restaurant, and he has a sandwich named after Ray Bourbon.
Wow. So at that time, I mean, you said that he wasn't treated well when he was in prison. Is that correct?
Not at all.
What happened?
Well, they had, it was kind of an open door thing. They knew he was harmless, and he hadn't been to trial yet for the sentencing. And the jail was real old, and he had kind of a room upstairs they kept him locked in. But there was a phone downstairs in the office that they would let him use if he requested it. And he went down one evening. Apparently the jailer had felt sorry for him, and he was going to use the phone. And for some reason, he stepped outside. And it was in the winter. It was very cold, and the door slammed shut, and he couldn't get back in. And they had gone to bed. They didn't hear him. And he nearly froze to death. He crawled into a truck that was in the parking lot and slept on the floor. They found him in the morning unconscious. And they did not treat him. He had diabetes and some other things, and he got pneumonia. They really just let him die, which is very sad.
Now, during that period, were you still in contact with him or no?
No, I'd lost. I didn't know where they'd taken him, and I read things in some of we had a magazine called The Phoenix here in town, and I knew some of the other drags that worked there, Kerry Davis and different ones, and I heard stories from them, you know. But it was really kind of a tragic ending, too. He had a very colorful, and certainly didn't harm anyone, had a lovely, kind of a pioneering gay life. I mean, back in a time when it was a little iffy.
Yeah. Put it mildly, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's why I was asking those questions. I was just kind of curious, you know. Because, you know, I grew up in I'm 56, but I grew up in a lifetime where pretty much everything was either acceptable or getting to be acceptable. So, everything was like in the past of, this happened and this happened and so I'm like, so I'm always curious about how things have changed over the years in regards to situations like that. So,
well, I'm a flower child. Let's put it that way. I really came out in the early 60s, and that's when it all exploded. And Kansas City was known for being open because all the gay bars were run by the mafia, including the Jewel Box. I won't mention names. Yeah. And they paid off all the police.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, but, and I don't, the thing that's funny is, the perception, I'm from California. The perception is like the middle of the country, like Kansas, is all highly conservative. There wouldn't be anything like that there or whatever,
Well, now, there's Kansas City is like Minneapolis, St. Paul. You got Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas. Well, Kansas City, Kansas is the poor sister. Kansas City, Missouri was jumping, still is big It was a mafia center, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was in the bar business, worked in speakeasy, so I could even write a book about that.
Yeah.
And I knew all the mobsters that ran all the gay clubs.
Yeah.
Wide open, you could dance and carry on and do all sorts of things.
Yeah. Well, where I kind of found the inklings of such things for me is, if you're familiar with Frank Zappa's first album, is called Freak Out. He's talking about, people freaking out, and he mentions Kansas, he mentions Minnesota, he mentions Washington, D.C., and I go, well, those are interesting places to mention, and so, me being an historian as I am, it's like, I investigated further, and I go, okay, it's not as stodgy or backwards as I'm led to believe. These places are happening and stuff like that. So, it's like,
my entire family is from Dublin, Ireland, Irish Catholics, and I was sent to private boys' academies and high schools and universities. But my father was extremely liberal, and I remember the night I told him I was gay. I was 17. He looked at me and said, "Well, I've always known that."
What took you so long?
Care.
That's funny. Excuse me. Let's see. I'm trying to think if I have any other bourbon things. I did write this down, so maybe you can talk a little bit. It's moving back to like 1932.
Right.
Boys Will Be Girls at Tate's Cafe in San Francisco. There's a reason I wrote that down, and I've forgotten, so you can refresh my memory.
That's a radio program that they did, and Ray was the star.
Uh-huh.
And one night, there were about 12 drag queens that were in the chorus, and Ray singing, and, they're in full regalia on stage, and all of a sudden, from behind the curtains comes about 15 San Francisco Vice Squad police in uniform, and dragged the queens off the stage screaming and threw them in the paddy wagons and took them away. And the radio audience thought it was part of the show.
Oh. That's funny.
And they had tipped off the photographers, so there's lots of photographs of the poor drag queens being, dragged into the jail with their wigs flying off and their eyelashes falling off, and it didn't bother Ray at all. He left San Francisco and went back to Hollywood and he was in several movies there.
Right.
He was in a movie that Nazimova made about Salome. It was a black and white silent film. He was one of the courtiers. Bizarre movie. Valentino got him the part in the movie. Valentino's wife was a lesbian. And she was having an affair with Nazimova. He, like I said, he made several movies while he was there. He also had a nightclub for a while.
Where was that?
It was in Hollywood.
Oh.
Back when it was still kind of chic for the movie stars to go watch the drag shows in the gay clubs. Randolph Scott and Cary Grant, they'd be hand in hand, arm in arm, sitting at one table. Joan Crawford, who's the biggest fag hag who ever lived, was at another table. Tallulah Bankhead. So...
It's interesting on that previous story is they got in trouble or raided in San Francisco, because I lived in San Francisco during the 80s and 90s, and, they had...
That's a long time later.
Yeah. And, very open and everything like that. Like I said, it's just when I grew up. And the big place at the time was Finocchio's. That.
Oh, yes. Well, Ray worked at Finocchio's once. Yeah. He was into middle age fairly well by then. He'd been with a touring company, and it had come to an end, and I think it came to an end in San Francisco, and he went and auditioned, and he worked there for several months. That's where he met Tallulah Bankhead. She came to see, you can imagine Tallulah. She came to see the show, and she was so fascinated with the whole thing, she went backstage. And she said, well, you all have to come to my suite at, I can't remember, a famous hotel in San Francisco. I'm having an all-night party. So all the drags went over, and she was snorting coke and drinking and telling dirty stories. And I guess it went on all night. She was quite a character.
I bet it was a St. Francis hotel. I don't know.
It was the St.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. She had a whole suite.
I was just guessing. I said, what was around then? And probably the likely place. And so I just guessed that. So,
Tallulah is a character unto herself.
That's funny.
Darling, she always said.
Yes. So, let's see. We mentioned Mae West a few times. Did you ever meet her or see her perform?
No,
okay.
And it's interesting. My book kind of starts out with how I got interested in Mae West. My dad was a huge Mae West fan because she had made movies in the 30s and 40s.
Right.
Well, I didn't see those. I wasn't born until 1942. And by then, her movie career was over.
Right.
But my dad was always like, oh, Mae West, and he'd do all these imitations. Owning a bar and being a bartender, he could do WCC. He could do all these voices.
Right.
And he was a singer on the radio at one time back in the day. But anyway, when TV first came out, I was a little kid, and, you had your little black and white TV. Well, to fill up space in the evening, they would have old movies. Well, I finally got to see Mae West, and I was like, oh, my goodness, look at this. So that's how I really got interested in Mae West. And, of course, as it went on, you could buy the movies and watch them. But no, I would, unfortunately never met her. I certainly would like to have. I know a couple of people who have.
Yeah. And
she was something else.
Yeah. Well, I know she did those two later films, Myra Breckenridge and Sextet. Yeah. I mean, they're kind of corny, but, I actually enjoy Sextet, even though it is very campy and corny.
I think Myra Breckenridge is actually a fairly decent film. It was a high-budget, big star. Sextet was made on a shoestring.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating. It's like watching a mummy.
That's a good way to put it.
She was so padded, and I know Edith Head, the famous costume designer, still designed her gowns even for Sextet. And Edith Head, I saw her on an interview on Dick Cavett, I think it was, said it wasn't like being a seamstress and sewing a dress for her. It was like being a sculptor and constructing it, because what you see as her body is all inside the dress. She was a little old lady by then. Bald, Interestingly, she never showed anything. She didn't even show her ankles.
Right. And she was short, too. Wasn't she like 4'11" or something like that?
Oh, she was. That's why the hair kept getting taller and taller.
I mean, you don't think about it because you see her next to Cary Grant, you see her next to W.C. Fields, and, it's just how they position somebody, that she looks like a very tall person, Nope.
Well, if you've ever seen photographs of the shoes that they made specially for her, they were like 8-inch platforms. That's why she walked the way she did.
Oh, yeah.
It made her rotate. She had those swivel hips. Well, she couldn't. You never saw her run in a film or actually dance. She just sort of stands there and gyrates.
Yeah, the only one I can compare her to is maybe for the same situation, and she actually danced a little bit better, maybe, as Carmen Miranda or something.
She wore those extremely high platforms, too.
Yeah.
She's another wonderful character.
So, before I let you go, any other books that you are planning, or other projects at this time, or?
Well, it's interesting. I have a very good friend named Mark Spano, who is a film producer. He did a award-winning documentary on Sicily a couple of years ago, and Mark's a good friend of mine, and he grew up in Kansas City, and he knew he's an Italian gentleman, and he knew all the people that ran the gay bars, and he knew about the jewel box and the history. And when I wrote this book, we talked a lot about it, and he wants to do a documentary on the Jewel Box, partially based on my book about Ray Bourbon. It's just a matter of, the pandemic came along. We had a local backer who was going to do it, but the backer got into financial trouble because of the pandemic, so we kind of have it on hold. But it's still a possibility. And some of the local drag queens, some of the older ones, sort of knew about Ray Bourbon, and they're willing to participate. And we wanted to do it as a semi-documentary with live actors and film clips and sound things, and even some animation.
Yeah, that could be good.
I think so too.
Kind of do it like This Is Elvis and have Kurt Russell or whatever, And so, Kurt Russell, not Kurt Russell. That was a different one. But the This Is Elvis film, they had recreated scenes and then actual footage and stuff like that. That's what I meant to say.
Right. And my friend Mark is very has a nice crew that really knows how to do that sort of thing. So keep your fingers. We do it. And I also got a good friend that lives in Las Vegas. He used to be the director of the, Palm Springs Film Festival. And he has lots of connections with the film world. So we're all kind of pushing it.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, Patrick. I just wanted
Absolutely delightful. I really enjoyed it.
I guess this is the time, and I do this on every show, is if people want to get in contact with you, or how do they get hold of your books, or any other things that you may have to offer, any websites or any public appearances you might be making. The floor is yours.
Well, both books are still available. Double Entendre, The Parallel Lives of Mae West and Ray Bourbon, is available as a collector's item on Amazon. It can be a little bit pricey, but the Maria Callas book is a collector's item. The Colors of Callas. The Double Entendre is very much available. And you can get it at various prices. It comes in a hardback, softback, Kindle, ebook, however you'd like to do it. And if anybody wants to talk to me, they can contact me by email, and if we establish that we want to have a conversation, then we'll go ahead.
And do you have a website too, or?
No, I don't. We took it down.
Okay.
Yeah, we took it down. My email is ombrarecds@AOL.com.
Okay. And are you making any personal appearances anywhere, or?
Well, I plan to do a couple of book things in Milwaukee. I have a friend there.
Okay.
That was with NPR about it, and I'm going to. We've talked about me coming up after the holidays, if they don't have a blizzard. Milwaukee's a wonderful town for this sort of thing. They're very involved in the arts on all levels. So.
All right. Well, very good. And again, I want to thank you, Patrick C. Byrne, for being my special guest.
Well, thank you so much.
And that wraps up another episode of the Fun Ideas Podcast.
Well, good afternoon, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Okay, thank you. Have a good day.
Have you got a minute? Good. Well, just sit down and relax and let me tell you about my operation. This is the real dirt. Of course I had it done. To all of you that know me, you might have seen it coming. So this will be no surprise. Everyone asks me, how does it feel? Well, it feels just fine to me. I can be the woman I've always wanted to be. For the change, I went south of the border. It took me just days to pack. I arrived there with excess baggage, but I had a lot less coming back. There's been a change in the gender, a big change in me. From R-A-Y, I've changed to R-A-E. So if anyone should ask you, just feel free to say, There's been a change in Ray. There's been a change in Ray. Now, I can do many things as a woman I could never do as I was. I've been dropped with a man of distinction ad, so I'm dickering with maiden form bras. Well, I could become an actress, star of stage and screen, replace Ethel Barrymore, and make the corn turn really green. Now, all this fuss about Marilyn and her ever-shifting gears, that poor little girl has stopped only one bus. Madge, I've been lousing up traffic for years. I could even pose for a calendar that would make Miss Monroe weep. And you can bet that when I'm around, that sleeping prince wouldn't sleep. Or I could be an actress. Or a female spy. Can't you just see me as Martha Horry Bourbon, a bat too gay to die? I could be a spy in Suez and find out what NASA's doing, keep those pilots happy, and keep those pipelines flowing. Of course, I could star in a show in Las Vegas, dressed like Dietrich in Net and Allure. In her case, they knew what was caught in the net. In my case, they'd never be quite sure. I could give Gina a run for her money. Oh, Lala Frigida girl, you are through. I'd love to swing on a trapeze. If Tony and Bert would swing, too. Of course, I won't tell you all of my secrets, just enough to let you find a hint in. But I can do more in a gown by Dior than I can in a suit by Jim Clinton. And I may not say anything completely to convince those doubting Thomases, whose suspicions are slightly shady. You may question some of the details, but you cannot deny that I am a lady.
Thank you for listening, and thank you, Patrick C. Byrne, for being my special guest. Remember, you can always watch the video version of this episode on YouTube. Episode number 189 will be coming soon. If you would like to comment and or be a guest on this podcast, please drop me a line at funideas.mark@gmail.com. Become a Patreon of Mark Arnold and Fun Ideas Productions. If everyone listening just contributed $1 a month, that would be a tremendous help in continuing the production of my books and this podcast. Also, subscribe to my YouTube channel. The opening and closing music for the Fun Ideas podcast is provided courtesy of Andrew the Slow Poisoner Goldfarb and is used with permission. This has been the Fun Ideas Podcast. This is Mark Arnold speaking. This episode is copyright 2022. Fun Ideas Productions. Thank you, and good night.